Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to share with you how I make my own homemade sketchbooks, and I wanted to bring you along. So strap in and let's get started. Here are the supplies you'll need. I have this X-Acto utility blade along with a sharp pokey thing or an awl. Mine is bent and I don't really use mine because I have this, which is the Martha Stewart paper punch. I will link it in the description below. A curved needle, but a normal needle will work fine. I just prefer the curved needle, it makes it easier. I have this real leather thread. This is coated in wax, and I will link that down below. I got that at Hobby Lobby. It came in 3 colors, so I bought all 3. This is a thimble. I don't actually use it in this video, but it is nice if you're prone to stabbing yourself. I highly recommend getting a leather thimble. This is it's called a bone or a bone fold, but it really helps to make crisp edges when you're folding things. That was my Fiskar paper cutter. Seems weird, but I do have a phone book. Stay tuned to find out why. 2 pieces of chipboard or book board, and then your paper. I have 12 by 18 paper that I use, and I just start by cutting that in half. So let's get started. So our first step is going to be to cut our paper to size. So I'm actually going to be cutting this paper down. I'm going to be cutting it in half, so I'm just going to put my paper at the 9-inch mark on my paper cutter so that I can just make a nice clean cut. And I'm just going to repeat this process for every single piece of paper so that I have the same size paper for all of them. So now that all of our papers are cut, I'm going to start folding them in half. So this will make our book about a 6x9 book. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold each of these individually to make sure that they each have a spine. And that's important. So you're not going to cut the paper down to the exact size of the sketchbook you want. You're just going to fold it in half because we're going to be binding this together. So we want to make sure that our needle has something to, and our thread has something to grip to. So now that we have folded all of our paper, I actually go ahead and I count these to make sure that I have a number that is divisible by 4. So I counted these and I had 14, which is not divisible by 4. So I actually ended up getting back up and getting 2 more pieces of paper, no, 1 more piece of paper that I could cut down to make 2 more sheets so that I would have the even number of 16, because it's important to know how many you're making. I mean, technically you don't have to put 4 pages in each signature, which is what I will explain that process later. I just prefer to have 4 sheets in each signature. You could just do 2, you could do 3, but just make sure that you are keeping it even throughout all of the signatures in your book. So now that we actually have the correct amount of pages, I'm going to start by grabbing 4 of my folded sheets, and I'm going to start putting them inside each other. So one inside the other, and then another inside of that one, and again inside of that one, so that they're all together with the same spine essentially. So this forms a little bundle, and this bundle is called a signature. So I'm just going to repeat that until I don't have any more pages left and all of my signatures are built. now that we have our signatures built, we're going to start working on our cover. So what I do is I take my 2 pieces of chipboard or bookboard. I have bookboard. I bought it on Amazon. Link will be down below. And I'm going to take one of my signatures and put it on top of one of my sheets of bookboard to see if well, first I try to figure out if I can maybe squeeze 2 in there, but I couldn't. So I'm just going to trace around this. I try not to be too like precious and careful when I'm making these. You could like measure it out and everything and make it absolutely perfect, and that's fine. I personally don't do that because I find I'm not as willing to use it if it's perfect, because I don't want to mess it up. So I try to keep it looking handmade, feeling handmade, and I'm okay with that. But that being said, you can measure this and you can be really careful and use a straight edge when you're cutting this out. I didn't feel like it, so some of my edges are just a little bit wibbly, but it's fine. And what I do is after I've cut this piece out, I'm actually just going to put it on top of my other piece of bookboard and trace it, and then do the same thing with cutting it out. And I have that little mini cutting board there, which is really nice because I don't have to get my really big one out when I'm using it. Not that it matters, I have cuts all over my desk because I'm a mess and sometimes I don't get the cutting board out. If you wanted, you could also try using scissors. And if you don't have chipboard or bookboard, if you just have like an old like sketch pad that has the cardboard backing, I've made plenty of sketchbooks using the cardboard backing off of other sketchbooks. Alright, so the next step is to put our sketchbook together. To start, I'm just going to put my signatures in between my covers, and then I'm going to tap it so that the spine is lined up right with the top of the sketchbooks, and then I'm going to face this spine up to the ceiling and mark where I want to have my stitches. So this will be where I know to punch holes and things like that. Again, you could measure this. I know a lot of people will try to do like an inch down from the top and then maybe make it even. I just don't care. And so as long as my book is held together, it doesn't bother me. I think it looks fine. But if you're an absolute perfectionist, you can measure this and measure out, make sure they're even on both sides. Mine definitely weren't, so there's definitely like way that you have to have the signatures together, and it makes it a little bit more complicated when you go to bind it, because when you're adding a signature, you have to like make sure that the holes line up and everything. And then what I do is I take the mark on the top of my spine for the cover, and I just pull it down like 1/4 to 1/2 inch, just so that I know where to poke my holes on the fronts of the cover, because you'll have to do that for the front and back of the cover. And then once you've got those lines down, we're ready to start punching holes. This is what it looks like if you can see it. Lighting's bad, camera's bad, it's a good time. So now we have our handy dandy phone book. I bet you all were wondering why we have a phone book. This is good for punching holes. So for the covers, I always use the awl. I'll try to link one that's actually good in the description box, because this one sucks. I mean, it does the job, but I bent it like immediately upon trying to use it. And I've had this since college and it works fine, but I definitely have to be careful about which way I'm pushing down on it because I have bent it. I didn't do it here, but I highly suggest after you poke a hole, and I like to put my awl the whole way through it, go back through the other side of the hole and do the same thing so that you have it even on both sides. It just makes it easier for the needle to come in and out of the sketchbook. So I'll repeat this for the back cover, and then we'll get started on punching holes in the paper. So the way I do this is I just unfold my signatures, but I keep them together. So I really only have to punch 4 holes at a time for each signature, and I'm not like going individually through the papers. You can use your awl for this if you don't want to buy the Martha Stewart paper punch, which is totally fine. I get it. I bought it because I took a bookbinding class, and it was suggested because we were going to be punching a lot of holes. So I always use that. And the other thing with that is that the smallest setting on the paper punch is actually a good bit bigger than the punch that you'll get from the awl, which means that it's so much easier to get your needle through. And it doesn't really affect the thread, as long as you're not using like sewing thread, which I don't recommend. It breaks too easy, but it works really good for if you use the wax leather thread like I do, or if you use embroidery thread or hemp thread, whatever you're using as thread, it'll work really well. And see here, you can actually see the hole, which is really nice. And you couldn't really see it before when I used the awl, and not just because my hand was in the way, it just was hard to see, and it would have been even harder to get the needle through. So I like to use the paper punch, and I'll link it down in the description box below if I can find it, or maybe something similar. I got mine at Michael's. They might still sell it. I don't know. Haven't looked. But yeah, so you'll just repeat this for all of the signatures. And since I'm only doing 4, just because I wanted to keep it smaller, I usually do anywhere from 6 to 8 signatures in my sketchbooks, just to make them like nice and big. But this is the paper that I actually use to print my art prints that I sell in my shop, which, if you didn't know, I have an online shop now. So if you want to go down in the description box, I will have it linked, but it is samhaltermanart.com/shop. And I have stickers and prints available, and I will be doing a restock at some point, hopefully in September, and there will be some new products coming on there, but just keep an eye out for that. So now we've got our signatures all punched. It is time to start binding, friends. So what I like to do is I usually do about 3 arm lengths of the thread. I only did 2 for this one. I probably should have gone a little farther because I ended up having to rethread my needle at the very end, like literally the last hole of the last signature. I had to rethread my needle, which was annoying, but it's okay if you have to rethread your needle. It's just annoying. So I try not to have to, but inevitably you have to. So thankfully I was able to show you how to do that, so you don't have to panic if you do. I sped this up because it takes an awful lot of time to get the wax thread through the needle. It gets stuck and caught up a lot, so I sped through that. But what you'll do is once you have it threaded into the middle, take those 2 ends and just tie a knot. I like to tie 2 just because it makes me feel more comfortable, and I'm an anxious human. So I usually tie 2 knots so that I just basically like you're getting ready to sew up a pair of pants or something. And now we're gonna get started. So pick one of your covers and then 1 signature, and we're gonna start with that. Alright, so I like to start from the bottom hole on my signature. You can start from the top, it doesn't really matter, but you're just gonna go in through the center of your signature, through that hole, and just pull your needle the whole way through. Simple, we're done. Just kidding, there's a lot more steps. So once you have that through, you're gonna wrap this around the cover. So you're gonna go around to the front or back, whichever cover it is, it doesn't matter. And you're gonna come back through. Oh, here's me fixing my needle because it wasn't perfectly centered. That does actually kind of matter. You're gonna go through that hole in between the cover and the signature. So you don't want to go through the signature, that would just poke a hole through your pages. So you just want to come up in between it. Takes a minute. This is why the curved needle is helpful, guys. With a straight needle, it is much harder to do that. So I highly recommend getting a curved needle. You can get like packs of 3 at Joann's and probably Michael's too. So now that we have that, make sure you're tightening each stitch as you go along. And then you're just gonna take your needle and go around that stitch that you just made. That's between the signature and the cover still. So you're just kind of wrapping it around. And this will kind of tie a knot, but it also adds like a braided effect as you keep moving along with the signatures. And now take that needle and go back through that same hole in your signature. Here's me trying to remember if that's what you do. It's been a while since I stitched one of these, so I had to remember. And then I remembered. There we go. So put that back through into the middle and pull it tight. And then you're just going to take your needle once you've pulled that nice and tight, and you're going to stick it through the next hole. And we're just going to repeat that same process. So go through, pull it nice and tight. Make sure it's not caught on any corners. Pull those little tie ends. We'll come back at the very end and cut them off. You can cut them off right at the beginning. I always leave them till the end just in case I need them. I never do, but just in case. Now go around the cover and then through that hole and come up between the signature and the cover. And this gets a little bit harder with every stitch. Just the process of getting it between the signature and the cover, it's obnoxious. But thankfully, once you finish this cover, you don't have to worry about it until the next cover. So once you have the cover on, it actually gets pretty easy. We'll just pull that through, make sure it's all nice and tight, and then wrap it around. I try to remember which way I wrapped it the first time and then repeat that same motion every single time. So this time I was going from top to bottom, which is what I did the last time, and I'm going to continue the entire way going top to bottom. It just makes it look a little bit more even and nice. It doesn't really matter, you can do it however you feel like it, but that's just how I do it. I try to keep it the same motion to make it look nice and even. It's the one thing I do kind of care about. And then you just go back through that same hole in your signature to go back into the middle. Make sure there's no little loose loops, and then pull it nice and tight. What the heck did I do? All right, I fixed it, cool. Let's keep going. So now, pull that nice and tight and stick it back through the next hole. Notice how there is like a longer break. You can put a whole section in the middle of your signature if you want. I prefer having that longer look, but you can add as many of these holes as you want. It just means more binding and more thread. But I tend to find that 4 works just as well. So once you've gone through that hole, you're just going to do the same thing. Go around the cover, put it through the hole, come up between the cover and the signature. And then go around that stitch. And back through that hole into the center of her signature. So this last hole that we're going to go into on our signature is the one that's different. We're going to go out. It's basically the same up until the very last step. So we're going to come out, pull it nice and tight. We're going to go around our cover, put it through that hole, come up between the cover and the signature. Maybe? Oh, I stabbed myself. That was what that pointing was. That was, don't hit your finger, Sam. And then once we've gotten that pulled nice and tight, we're going to go around it like we have all the other ones. And then this is where it changes. After you go around this and you pull it tight, do not go back into that signature. We are going to add another signature. So remember, we have 3 more signatures or more if you're crazy. Or if you just are like me and like to have more signatures. Put it on top, make sure your holes line up. That's very important, especially if you don't measure them. If you measure them and you made them even, you probably don't have to worry about it. but I don't measure. Okay, so now you're just gonna go in to the hole of the next signature. And we're just gonna start the process all over again. So make sure that's pulled nice and tight. You want those signatures lined up. Once you know that this is tight, we can take our needle and go into the next hole. And so we're just gonna keep doing basically what we were doing, but now instead of going around the cover, once we pulled this nice and tight, we're just gonna go over that last stitch. So where we had been actually exactly where we'd been going up and around before, we're gonna continue going around that same stitch for this signature. The next signature, it will be the stitch that we've just created. So I know that doesn't make sense right now, but I will explain that once we get to I'll explain that more in when we add the next signature. But yeah, and then go back into the hole we came out of, pull that nice and tight. And now that we're back into the middle of our signature, we can go in through the next hole and repeat. So now that we're back in the center, we'll go in through our last hole on this signature, pull it nice and tight. We're going to go around our previous stitch for the last signature, pull it nice and tight. And now, once again, instead of going back into that hole, we're going to grab our next signature. Make sure those holes are nice and lined up. And then we can go in through the matching hole on our next signature. Maybe, if I can get it lined up right. Oh, you know, this one I had one page that was like the hole was just off center, so make sure your pages are lined up when you're punching those holes at the beginning, because otherwise it makes it a little bit more difficult to get your needle in through the signatures. But now that that's pulled nice and tight, we can move on to going in to the next hole. And so here's what I was talking about. So instead of going to the cover hole, we're actually going to go in between the first and second signatures. Just like that. Wrapping it around. And then we'll just go back in through the hole and repeat for the next couple holes. Alright, so here's where it's going to get tricky. For the next signature, you're not just putting the signature on, so this is the last signature. If you have more than 4, you're going to have more signatures to go through, but for your last signature, you're going to put the signature and the cover on, and we're going to stitch these two on at the same time. So to start, make sure everything's lined up really nicely, and you're going to go in through the cover hole first, come up between it and the signature, and pull it nice and tight. This is going to be the hardest part of the entire process. It's just getting that last signature and the front cover on, or the back cover, whichever one. And now we're going to go in between our second and third signatures. Do a nice little loop-de-loop. And now you're going to you're going to find the hole to get your needle through that back into the middle of your final signature. And that's probably the trickiest part, is after you've stitched all those, to go in and also maintain tightness, because you want to keep this as tight as you can get it, because otherwise it's going to be all loosey-goosey every time you use it and shifty around, and it's not fun. But it is definitely a struggle to do this. I struggle to do it every single time. As you can see, I'm working through it. But there we go, and we're through. So I'm just going to make sure that that's all pulled nice and tight, and we're just going to go in through our next hole and back out into the spine. We're going to go around, put that through the cover, come up between the cover and the signature. I have found that it is easier to do it upright like that, so that the spine is facing you when you're adding the cover, just so that you can see everything together. And then go around between the second and third signatures. Pull it nice and tight, and then go back in to your last signature. And back out to the spine. Here's me realizing that I'm going to have to get more thread for the next hole. But once again, around the cover, come up through between the cover and the signature, pull it tight, do your loop-de-loop between the second and third signature, and then back through that hole. And as you can see, I have literally run out of thread for the last hole, which is absolutely obnoxious. If I had been smart, I would have gotten more thread at the beginning of this signature just to make it easier on myself. But I'm just going to tie a knot. So I'm going to go tie a nice knot there in the middle. I actually tie two just to be sure. I probably could have gotten away with one, especially since they're waxed. The threads are very good at sticking together. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess. And then I'm just going to pull a little bit of thread. You don't need a lot to do one hole, so I think I just did like 1.5 feet probably, so I could get it nice and folded in half. Thread that needle, which always takes longer than it should. Alright, with our needle threaded, double knotted at the end, we're going to go in through that last hole and come out at the spine, go around the cover, make sure everything's pulled nice and tight, come up between the cover and that last signature. Once this is tight, we'll do our final loop-de-loop between the second and third signatures. And then go back through where we came out of the signature, so we get back into the middle of it, where we will tie our final knot. So now that my knots are tied, I'm actually going to go through and trim all of my loose ends that I left. You could have done this as you went. I choose to just do them all at the very end. They're always really easy to find. But now that all of our knots are done, we have a sketchbook. And the best part is, because we've used a Coptic stitch, which is what the stitch that you just did is called, it will lay flat no matter where we open it to. It might bend up a little bit, but the reality is it lays pretty flat. And it's a little bit imperfect because if you're like me, you didn't measure anything, so everything's kind of wobbly. But I really like these sketchbooks. I hope you do too. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.